there, my name is Zoe Angelopoulos. Thank you for your time today, and I'd like to talk to you guys a little bit about prion disease. Because bad news, depending on how you gauge it, this disease may genuinely be worse than rabies. So first, let's start off with, what are prion diseases? Prion diseases, also called transmissible spongiform encephalopathies, keep that name in mind, are a group of rare, incurable, and always fatal diseases caused by the misfolding of PRP proteins called prions. Prion diseases occur within both humans and animals. In animal cases, you've probably heard of mad cow disease. Recently, there's been an uptick of deers with chronic wasting disease. If you've heard that, those are prion diseases. What separates prion diseases away from other disease forms is that it's not viruses, it's not a bacterium, it's not a parasite. It's actually a protein that just misfolds, and that protein causes other proteins around it to misfold, causing damage to tissues, specifically brain tissue. Here is a picture of a misfolded PRP protein for you to see as well. What are the symptoms of prion diseases? So, as prion diseases are neurodegenerative in nature, the result is that they lead to dementia. The speed of this progression does vary depending on the disease, as do the symptoms, but many of the symptoms include confusion, insomnia, hallucinations, memory loss, muscle twitching and violent jerking, also called myoclonus, and then personality and mood changes. How does one get a prion disease? Prion diseases can be acquired, genetic, or sporadic. Once again, this is protein misfolding protein. So it can have a variety of different causes. Either way, the result is usually the same. Genetic would be genetic Jakob-Creutzfeldt's disease, Gertzmann-Straussler-Schinker syndrome, and fatal familial insomnia. Genetic would be inherited prion diseases from parent to child. Acquired would be Kuru, variant Jakob-Creutzfeldt disease, and iatrogenic Jakob-Creutzfeldt's disease. The acquired form is not caused by things like kissing or doing things of that nature. It's actually usually from eating infected brain tissue, specifically infected tissue, or medical equipment in iatrogenic cases. So like if a doctor cuts into something, like they're doing brain surgery and they reuse that same scalpel, that scalpel would have prions on it and could contaminate you with prion diseases. And then sporadic Jakob-Creutzfeldt disease. Sporadic meaning completely random in this circumstance, and this is the most common form of prion diseases. Let's talk a little bit about sporadic Jakob-Creutzfeldt's disease. So sporadic, as we mentioned earlier, is the most common kind of prion disease, and it happens more within older populations, from the ages of like 55 through 75. The average lifespan of a person with this disease, beginning with the onset of symptoms, is 6 months to 1 year. Very short time frame here that we're talking. The symptoms are divided up into first symptoms, which is what loved ones notice, early symptoms, which is what is reported within the doctor's office, and third symptoms, which is the symptoms that are present all throughout the disease's course. These symptoms can be things like memory loss, delirium, hallucinations, even headaches. And even though this sounds very scary, it just happens and there's nothing anyone can do about it. Keep in mind, though, that many of us are lucky to make it to the age of 60 in the first place. Patients often die of other causes before they even die of prion disease after being diagnosed. So, even though this is scary, also prion diseases in general are very rare. Sporadic Jakob-Creutzfeldt is the most common of these, but it's still a rare disease in and of itself. Next, let's talk about a genetic prion disease, hence the familial here in the title. Fatal familial insomnia. Patients can become symptomatic in this disease a lot younger than Jakob-Creutzfeldt's, anywhere from their 20s to their 50s. The average disease course is 18 months, and there are 4 stages. The earlier stages include sleep issues, like lucid dreams, oddly enough, and then early kind of stages of insomnia. Towards the end, we have full-fledged insomnia. The patient is not sleeping. They're in delirium. They often don't really know where they are, what's going on, until they eventually pass away within that 18-month course. Symptoms include sleep and neurological disturbances, eventually resulting in death, of course, from lack of sleep. Behavioral changes and mood changes, because how would you not have those with this disease, as well as autonomic dysfunction, so issues with heart rate and things like that. Neuron loss and gliosis in the thalamus from the disease is what contributes to this insomnia aspect, as it causes issues with sleeping, and the thalamus is in charge of a lot of our sleep-wake processes. Now let's talk about some acquired prion diseases. We have variant Jakob-Creutzfeldt's, which is caused by eating a cattle infected with the animal form of Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease. This disease in animals, or specifically in cattle, is called bovine spongiform encephalopathy, also called mad cow disease. Prions can also be spread through medical equipment in cases of iatrogenic Creutzfeldt-Jakob. Variant Jakob-Creutzfeldt's also actually affects younger populations within the 20s range. It also has a longer disease progression, so rather than being something like, 6 months to a year, it can last for years. So a very specific case that made me personally not want to go into prion disease research, even though I find it so fascinating, because these people do deserve to have a cure, and we want to work on treating those things. Unfortunately, prions can be spread through medical equipment, and there was a lab worker in France who was working with prion diseases. She was a researcher, and she poked herself through her glove, and she actually ended up dying of a prion disease years later at the age of 33. So this disease is no joke, and it is very hard to get rid of because, once again, it's not like a virus that can be killed. It's misfolded proteins, so it lasts on surfaces for a very long time. Kuru is another prion disease, which originates from tribes within Papua New Guinea, and thank goodness this disease has been almost completely eradicated. A funeral ritual in which family members would consume the deceased of this tribe, particularly the brain matter, is likely what caused this disease. As with the cessation of this funeral practice, the disease was pretty much eradicated. One weird symptom of Kuru that separates it from Jakob-Creutzfeldt's is outbursts of laughter, like at random times. It's thought that one patient within this Kuru tribe had Jakob-Creutzfeldt's disease, some variation of it, and then that person's brain tissue was eaten, and then this process continued, resulting in the Kuru disease, but thousands actually died from this disease whenever it was at its highest peak. So now let's talk about a little bit about how prion diseases affect the brain. Once again, prion diseases are called transmissible spongiform encephalopathies. Spongiform, hence the term, because spongiform meaning the brain tissue becomes sponge-like. So the first patient here, who has sporadic Creutzfeldt-Jakob, has, through their diffusion-weighted imaging, shows us bright spots of damaged tissues in the putamen, the caudate, and cerebral cortical regions. These are the lighter parts that indicates damage. The second patient's MRI, who has inherited Creutzfeldt-Jakob, so genetic, shows atrophy or shrinkage all over the cerebellum, as well as enlarged ventricles, which are the darker parts, and widened sylvian fissures. The likely cause of this is simply because we're losing tissue from the spongiform aspect of this disease, and so therefore there is more ventricle space and more space between the fissures themselves. If you'd like to learn a little bit more about what's happening in prion disease research, please, I suggest checking out this TED Talk to see what is happening next. This amazing woman here, Sonia Valaba, is a prion disease researcher, and she herself has genetic Jakob-Creutzfeldt's, I believe. They are working on treatment and cures. Obviously, there hasn't been anything substantial yet, but deleting that PRP protein, which is the protein that misfolds and eventually becomes a prion, doesn't necessarily cause damage, they're finding, to a living person or to a living animal. I think they're working with animals. But it does not cause damage to that living creature. And as a result of that, this would suggest that we could eliminate the PRP protein entirely without having any harm, and therefore would be able to eliminate the misfolding of those proteins themselves. Here are my sources, and thank you so much for listening to this video. I would like to say that no AI was used within the script writing or within the presentation materials. And if you have any questions about prion diseases, feel free to reach out to me. It is a huge interest of mine. It's a very scary subset of diseases, but the interest in how it affects the brain is genuinely fascinating. And once again, even though these diseases are scary, it's rare. I'm talking like 1 in 5,000 rare. It's a very, very rare disease. It can happen, but thankfully, we have gotten to the point now that we do not eat animals who have the variant Creutzfeldt-Jakob. So I think the very rare cases that have happened have actually been outside of the United States, and if the ones that have happened within the U.S. are from people who were eating animals outside of the U.S. So very rare chances of getting it here. But thank you again, and I hope you have a great day.